We'll give you, Spencer will have some time cards to let you know where we're at. So 15 and 5 minutes. Okay. And these costs are
okay, thanks, Heidi. All right, tell you how am I sounding in the back? Am I okay? Hands up. All right, thank you. So I'm giving a little bit longer presentation than most folks. I got an additional 15 minutes. So I think we're going to run right up until about 10:50. That's quite a bit to cover. I'm not going to be talking about any specific tools or models, certainly not in the terms of some of the models we might talk about. You think about regression or distributed hydrological models, empirical models. It's really kind of going to touch on some LiDAR topics. We can't get into anything too deep that the time does not allow. When we think about LiDAR and web applications, we tend to call them tools, but they certainly aren't like what I mentioned previous. I had to drop some things. I dropped the stuff that I would normally talk about in watersheds in this aspect and how that relates to tools and scope and scale. Again, just for time management. LiDAR. So I'm here. I was asked to come in and talk a little bit about LiDAR and how it fits into some of these tools. I did not bring a presentation that shows an airplane flying over and lasers coming down and hitting stuff and going back up. Like who here doesn't understand nowadays what is LiDAR? I can touch on it briefly. What kind of got us understanding nowadays? Good, because we spent a lot of years going around and talking about and educating what LiDAR is. Largely, a lot of times we think about what is LiDAR, and a lot of people gravitate right towards digital elevation models, DEMs. And there's a lot of other products out there that we derive from LiDAR that certainly is the most common. One of the other most common products that we derive from LiDAR is the 2-foot contours. In preparing for this presentation today, with Heidi, we did a lot of coordinating, myself and Heidi and Julie Westerlund and Barbara Weissman. Really, what should I talk about? This is like one of the most diverse groups I've ever talked to. I'm usually kind of a more techie person. And Heidi said, make it personal. Make it do what you have done in the past. And so on Sunday night, I was flying back from Cabo, Mexico, and I was looking out my window because I always get the window seat. That's where my wife puts me. And why does she put me there? Because she knows I'm looking out that window at topography. I can't avoid it. I can't get away from it. Everywhere I go, everywhere I drive, everywhere I look, I think about what is the landforms on Earth's surface and how is water moving. It's been my career. It's also my personal life, and I want to touch on a little bit because we all have personal lives that interact with our daily routines in our lives at work. And I have a fairly diverse one that relates to, or at least I'm going to try to relate it to, my working life. My family has been in the gravel and excavation business for 100 years as of next year. My family knows how to drain water, how to move water, how to move land. And that's given me a pretty interesting perspective my entire life on watching how we move water. My property, we own about 650 acres, has been draining for 100 years. I've seen the water table drop about 4 feet. Where I did my first duck hunting, that pond is gone. But my dad still excavates there to put gravel on his landfill. This is one of our larger track hole buckets. That's my daughter and a lifelong friend sitting in that back hole. So we can move a lot of material. The other thing we have is cattle. So why talk about cattle excavation and relate that to LiDAR and relate this to clean water legacy tools? It's because some of us really strive to produce data that you can put in the hands of people to use to help us work with people in the field. I understand what it takes, and we're talking to landowners in the bottom line, what it takes to make a profit in a farming application, manure management, for example, pasture management, pasture harvest, that kind of stuff. Those are the things that the people who are going to be running these tools will have to think about and work with when they're in the field doing implementation on the ground. No matter what all that's going to do, it's all about implementation. So my career, and as I look around the room, by the way, I know about a third of the people here, and I got a hunch I probably know another third of who are out there tapping in by web. Myself and a lot of folks, we've been mapping and trading data for a long time, so that's my background. I'm a data developer. Jim Zolstad is sitting in the back there. He and I created the DNR Watershed Project. I believe that every tool talked about today and presented today has used the data that we created. That is the DNR Watershed Dataset. The DNR Watershed Dataset built the NHD Dataset. We created that using GIS technology and really migrated things from the world of maps into the world of digital data. And I began with some of this stuff in 1992, and the reason I'm going to talk about this now is because I want you to look at this ditch. I'm a hydrologist. You know what a hydrologist does when it rains and it snows? You get in the car and you go out and see where the water's moving on the landscape. That's what you do if you want to understand where water's moving. But for years, even when I would go up in an airplane and fly around and validate my work, for years I dreamed of having something, as GIS was developing and advancing, to be able to look at things and really capture those landforms. And what came along was LiDAR data. You know, we went through the evolutionary period. We thought we had it all when we got these these buttons here. I know it's there. Alright, so these are the DRGs and the DOQs. When we got these going, when we got these up, statewide famous products for all of us to use, we really thought we had it. When Jim and I were doing watershed delineations, we could use these tools to delineate watersheds in a manual sense using GIS technology. We really thought we had it then. And then, like I already alluded to, along came LiDAR. So that's what brings me here today, to talk about what LiDAR gives us, at least in a cursory overview sense, and how we can work with it to help us better understand water conveyance features on Earth's surface. It is absolutely revolutionizing how we look at Minnesota's landscape. I'm convinced that it's the greatest educational tool that we have to help us, experts, relay our message and understanding of the landscape to the average customer, the citizen. In the DNR office in Cambridge, where I've worked for the 26 years that I've been here now, a customer would come to the front desk and we would bring up maps and we'd spread all these maps all over the counter. We would try to communicate with them about what's going on. And they'd see 5 different maps, 7 different scales. We would have contours, we'd have watersheds. Now we do all that in one swell tool called Mentopo. But really the base data, the foundational data, is LiDAR. So some of you who don't have a lot of great familiarization with LiDAR, what we have here is a LiDAR Derived visualization model. This is a high-quality digital ortho quad image, and you see what we gain from. We gain a lot of information from here. You see there's some ditches there, and you can be an aerial photo interpretation specialist and see the water's moving down through here. You know what? You don't need a degree in aerial photo interpretation or hydrology to see that these landforms are conveying water down right there. So you combine the two and you become very effective in communicating about this data with our bottom line, which is our customer. So there's in a nutshell kind of what brings me here. And I was asked to do this because some of you are sitting out there right now who knows me that keep saying, why do you keep showing up and talking about LiDAR? Well, folks, we're not fully there yet in how we completely utilize and properly utilize it to fully benefit all of our business needs. So I'm the marketer, I'm the salesman, I'm the sales pitch to develop support out there so that we can carry this data even further. What I'll touch on a little bit is what I call next generation data. But you know what? The data still isn't perfect, and I just can't help but pushing the wrong button. So use my own clicker. What a mess. Alright, so it's still not perfect, so I guess I'm back on track. So the content I want to be doing today then is, so we're going to touch on the water quality framework just like Bruce did before me. That was one of our requirements. Touch on a little bit about my background. I've been asked to talk about a case study. We're a little bit on DM hydromodification, DM display, something that I created called Hydrographic Position Index, and in topo. So the water quality framework. You've already seen this. We were asked to fit things in, our presentations into this. If you literally look at the first orange box, which is local implementation, that's really at the heart of a lot of this work. The blue box is monitoring and assessment, and that really informs folks. And then that purple box is, one of the keywords that I pulled out of there is math. And I see these three things tied together to really help us build that foundation for the need for foundational data. And so if we plug these in, we've got DEMs, hydrologically modified DEMs, the HPI, which we're going to be talking about. And listen here again, because we see these fitting in multiple locations throughout this circle and cycle diagram. And really what we're talking about here is data development, data dissemination, meaning making it available to the customer, as well as data application. The customer actually uses the data within a tool and or then works with local folks and or the customer or landowner for implementation. So objectives then are really to remind us that these tools have dependency on foundational data and facilitate discussions. Really, this is not what this is all about today. We're not going to solve all the answers today. This is going to introduce people to concepts, and then also get us into topics that help facilitate what we want to talk about more. And one of those things with me is always DEM hydromodification. That is taking the existing LiDAR data and removing digital dams, and we're going to look at what that means, and then we're going to take a look at the HPI, Hydrographic Position Index. And I want those to be kind of takeaways, wrap that up at the end. But always building awareness for, like I said, creating data for these tools, creating data for a customer, for consumption, for use. And some of the most important messages are right here. Proper replication of landscape hydrology. To me, that's what it's all about. Creating accurate flow lines. So when we conduct our models, we run our models, we eliminate at least some of that certainty out there, that uncertainty, in relation to how we're trying to model landscape on hydrology landscape. I really strive for producing field-scale suitable data. Now you know why I do that. Because I know what it takes to move water across the landscape, excavate stuff. I know how fast we can change the landscape, how fast we can move water. And then we're going to talk a little bit about creating DEMs for the running of CCM map tool that you're going to hear about later in the presentation. So Mintopo. I was asked to talk a little bit about Mintopo. Mintopo is a web-based application that we created in the DNR, and really what it is our LiDAR data viewing and downloading portal. What that allows is folks to come in there and see the data and visualize it, and then if they want to download it, they can. And if anyone wants to, if you're not familiar with Mintopo and you want a URL, any search engine nowadays, you just type in MNTOPO and you'll get to Mintopo. Mintopo is a clean water leasing funded application that we put together a few years ago, and we hope to be advancing and updating some of the data that it runs on in the near future. It was developed from the very beginning to be a mobile device ready application. It is not perfect. It is difficult to take web apps and make them fully functional on a phone in particular. We do get some complaints. They say it doesn't look good on my phone. The phone is really small, but it works better on some of the tablets. So one of the things that we see most users do is using this for a seamless, statewide, on-screen, viewable area for viewing and interpreting landscape topography, in particular the LiDAR derived 50, 10, and 2-foot contours. Seamless. This is where we don't have to pull out individual USGS quad maps anymore or look at individual maps. These contours are seamless statewide. We have some functionality within here where you can turn the contours on and off. You can look at the flight lines. The flight lines have the data, metadata attached, in particular related to the time that the data was acquired, and we have seamless floodplain information there. Again, this is one of the areas we really want to update in advance. We have a profile tool in there. This tool gets a lot of use. This is how you can generate a profile on the fly, heads up on screen, and get instant results on a hill, for example. We did the testing of this particular tool on that hill, because I know that hill very well. It's been surveyed many times by our engineering firm. That is my dad's landfill. Yep, that's one other thing I get to inherit. We own a demolition landfill. But it's a great way to test this tool, because I had real-world surveyed elevation data for that hill. And I don't know if his batteries are any good in this thing or not, but anyway, keep pushing it. So how does this work? If you want to get a hold of the data, so you view the data, now you want to download the data, you can create a box as you see here in the red, and then you choose the data that you want, and this is the selection box here. You see right in here, you can choose if you want 1 meter DMs, 3 meter DMs. You can get the point cloud. That's formatted into LAZ, that's the zip format of the LiDAR DM. And then you get an email sent to you that allows you to download the data. You can create a map. So you specify the area, this is the area that we already looked at before, and then it outputs the map with some standard mapping and legend criteria components on there. So one of the things I always talk about in relation to kind of a tool, it's the other number one way, maybe number two way that LiDAR data is utilized, is the Hillshade. And Hillshades, we don't have to worry about, really reflects the aspect, azimuth, and the slope of the landscape. And so we're going to visualize and take a look at what that means. So in case you're not familiar with what this is a Hillshaded DEM, and you see all the topography on there. And what you see here is in these white boxes, these are some features that I was very much interested in. These are linear water conveyance features, very shallow ditches in the landscape, sub-meter in depth. But folks, those are the things, there's literally hundreds of thousands of those things on the landscape, and that's what routes water off the landscape, dumps it into the ditch, ditch goes to the river, rivers go to the Gulf of Mexico. So it all begins right here. And those are the features I'm always very interested in mapping. That's what that same area looks like on the DOQ. You see, so look what the LiDAR gives us in relation to the DOQ. It's pretty substantial in what it tells us. It tells us what's going on there. The basics of it. The basics of it is it's a representation of a synthetic position of the sun. And you're thinking, okay, I'm not a GIS specialist, I'm not a technician, why are you telling me this? I'm telling you this because if you likely are just a manager, you likely supervise people who use this. You might supervise people who could utilize some training to get better to use this. Because if you work with LiDAR data and you don't fully understand how to properly display the data, you aren't fully getting benefits out of the data, and you may have misrepresentations in your output or at least in your visual interpretation of the data product. So that's why we've included this. I've included this today. It was actually included in our statewide training we did around the state. So as I mentioned, it's a synthetic position of the sun. We're modeling the position of the sun where we can place it. And as we move this synthetic representation around the sun, the DEMs change. It changes the way we see this, but also screws with our mind. We're all familiar with the mind's eye, right? Jim's laughing. I know I was laughing, but your mind wants to see the sun in a very specific location, casting shadows. And I'm going to show you in a minute why that's important, even for this group. We're completely changing the landscape and the visual interpretation. Remember, visual interpretation is the number one way we interpret our results coming out of these tools. Your mind's eye wants to see the sun in a certain spot, and if it doesn't see that sun and casting shadows in a certain spot, all of a sudden these depth features, these ditches, these are ditches here, they're going to start coming out at you. Now that's fine, but the key message is, the takeaway message is that influences how you visualize and how you interpret what may be going on the landscape. This completely changes how it looks. These linear striations that you see going east and west there, those are furrows from a plow. That's a reflection of the accuracy of the LiDAR data. So these ditches that you're seeing are essentially a meter or less in depth. And these what almost look like linear hills going east and west are just nothing more than little mounds from a furrow from a plow. So that's the scale that we're at these days. That's the scale that our field staff are trying to work with this data at. Keep that in mind. So what is the problem with Hillshade? Well, the problem is that cast shadow. The cast shadow exists for our mind's eye. That's why it's there, so that we can interpret depth. And so when you look down on something, in a ditch in particular, you see this as the width of the ditch, But really, where is the foul leg of the ditch or the foul leg of the river? How do you place that? If your job is to digitize a ditch or a watercourse or a stream, where is the center of that? So you might end up with these zigzags all over because you're getting lost in what? The shadows. So, I set out to produce something that overcomes that, and that's the Hydrographic Position Index that I'm going to be talking about. And that's why I'm tying this all in, because you're going to see how often we now use that HPI product. I wanted something visual appealing, something that exploits water conveyance landforms on their surface, something that's simple and easy to produce, replicate. Because, again, my goal is in these things, zip points. This is the erosion that's occurring on the landscape. Millions of these things, I bet. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating, but I bet it's an awful lot. How many of these things have you seen as land practitioners out in the field, all over the landscape? This is where sediment's going. This is where the pollutants are going. They're shallow, they're short. They are conveying those things, those components, into the ditches. LiDAR captures these. Therefore, I think that they have hydrologic significance. But they're not mapped. They're not in any of our statewide data sets. They're not in any federal data set. I have pretty much almost argued to the point I had tears in my eyes with the folks who manage the NHD that they felt that these are hydrologically insignificant. I have a hard time with that, personally, because these things are related to the fluvial processes on our surface, the stuff that we're trying to get at, stuff we're trying to stop. So, I may have changed the battery in this thing. Maybe that's the deal. All right, yeah, I think you're right. All right, so Hydrographic Position Index, what is it? I'm not going to get into the technicalities of it, but essentially it is these localized elevation values. It's the difference in height and depth in terms of individual grid cells within a DM. Individual grid cells in 1 meter DMs is just that, 1 square meter. For every 1 square meter on our surface, we have an elevation value. And with that product, then, we can create something that looks just like this. And there you see those water conveyance features that we looked at earlier, coming out of the HPI without cast shadows. So now we've eliminated that need to have that sun cast across the landscape. And that then benefits greatly how we interpret outputs from our products. I know years ago I carried it further and created this thing that we call the fire color scheme. And what this does is this puts bright yellows on those highs and dark and black colors in those low signatures, and all of a sudden we have an illustration of landscape connectivity of where and how water moves on the landscape. Irrelevant of depth, it just illustrates to us where does water move. And this is what it looks like when we drape it on top of a hillshade that I showed you earlier. And see why I've kind of brought you full circle now with everything that I showed you in terms of an illustration. So to help you interpret what we have here, then, we have these dark features encased by the bright yellow. That is a ditch. In contrast to this bright yellow encased by black, that is a road. The dark is the roadside ditches. So we can take that further, we can drape back on top, we can exploit the elevation, we can really create some pretty pictures of what that looks like. But really, how are we using the HPI currently? We're using it more and more all the time. We're using it for breach line placement for DM hydromodification that I'll be talking about next. Hydrography validation, meaning if someone creates hydrography from LiDAR, we can then ask them or require them or advise to them anyway to drape their hydrography that they derive back on top of this authoritative product called the HPI, and that brings some sort of validation then into what they've created. We're using it in the buffer mapping application. We have used it in an Asian carp study, and I'll be talking about that. And we are seeing it being used for conservation practice locations. I've got a document out there that is available online, and you can go to the URL, or basically it's just at the NGO site right now. It currently, as a statewide product for public consumption, is not available. I just talked to some of our data administrators yesterday. We're having some trouble because of some security issues in relation to getting people at this product. We've also had to overcome some hurdles. Every time we work with this LiDAR data, we learn more about how to work with voluminous data. These things are huge. This one product alone is 37 million tiles in size. It's 100 gigabytes. If you just want to move it from one server to another, it takes days and days to copy that over. The good thing is it draws faster when it's on the screen and when it's all available. We're hoping about 1.5 months before it's publicly available. I'm pretty confident in that because in October I presented on this at the Water Resources Conference and I said it's going to be available in 2 weeks. We've gone through this evolutionary educational process of getting better at managing this large data set with proper security practices in place. So WASCOB, this is one way people are using the HPI because you can visualize where WASCOBs exist. You can visualize where WASCOBs should exist. Here's a WASCOB on the ground, here's a WASCOB right here. So these things just pop out at you visually. Gives you a nice way to visualize the landscape. Here's just another other scale of looking at it.
Sean, tell us what a WASCOB is.
Thank you, Julie. These are landforms that are generally put in for cost share with cost share dollars to minimize runoff in areas where we have steep slopes. And what I'm doing there is I'm dodging what WASCOB actually stands for.
Sediment control basin.
There we go. That's what it is.
Water and sediment control basin.
Water and sediment control basins. Where's the O come from? Oh, control. Oh, silly me. All right. Moving on. So another example of how we used the HPI a couple of years ago was actually in relation to better understanding landscape connectivity so we can understand how Asian carp may move across the landscape. Heidi asked me to talk about this as my case study today. Guess what? Heidi, did you talk to the folks and say get on there and find the carp because we're going to be talking about this?
I have some really good.
Yep. So, kind of some sad news in a way, but I think it's a big head carp if I remember right. Yeah, big head carp was identified in the Minnesota River. So, how did I get involved in this project? Well, sometimes when I talk about people about what watersheds are, I hear people talk about watersheds as being like these pilings driven into the ground, and that nothing will ever move over a major watershed. Nothing will ever get past a DNR Huck 8, or excuse me, a USGS Huck 8 boundary. And then nothing further from the truth. We have to be thinking about these things, differently. And certainly these folks putting these pilings in, they are not watershed delineators. In fact, we often delineate watersheds right down the center of roads. What's in a road? A culvert. Folks, we're really short-sighted. I've worked with a lot of resource managers that forget that for very short periods of time, water raises vertically and expands horizontally in the landscape, and that creates conveyance features for invasive species. The HPI can identify where those features may be, and that's just how we use it. So here we have a major watershed boundary, a Huck 8 boundary, and we have water flowing two different directions on opposite sides of that boundary. And hopefully it's showing up better for you. But that is the aerial perspective of it on the DOQ. And here we see a rain event. These pictures were courtesy of DNR Fisheries field staff, by the way. And then culvert, you can see there's a volume of water that comes through at a certain time. The field is often dry. In a very short period of time, we see overland flow forming what we call concentrated flow within these landforms that LiDAR has captured. And we essentially have a lake, and that creates connectivity between those two watersheds and crosses, or at least produces an opportunity for invasive carp to move across that watershed line. And so how does the HPI represent that then? If we peel this back, you can see those linear black striations representing some of those deeper features in the landscape where you saw that concentrated water forming in the landscape. And we can bring some topography in there, and now you can kind of see how the topography is formed in that area as well. Right there, and that's how it occurs. It's not that a watershed that Jim and I digitized is wrong, that's where you would put it. It's just that we have to remind ourselves that things aren't static out there. And these short-term events can happen. I've seen fish swimming in my own cornfield. And I mentioned that because I showed you we have excavation equipment. So what did my dad do? He dug a ditch about 15, 20 years ago, and it got fairly close to our agricultural field, but not quite. But we had a really rapid snow melt. We had a rain event. You put rain on snow, snow melt tracks, you get volume on the landscape, raises vertically, expands horizontally, created connectivity. That's how those fish got into my cornfield. In our area office in Cambridge, we've had people come in and say, those eagles, they keep dropping fish out in the field. Actually, what happened, folks, right? The fish swam there because after they ate the ability to swim upstream, the water receded, and that's how those fish got into that field. So that's why I know that, or I've always believed quite strongly that fish can move across the landscape. So, moving on. Digital dams. I'm going to touch a little bit on what are digital dams. And digital dams are really related to the fact that LiDAR data, LiDAR technology, does not represent or capture subsurface flows. The number one thing we think about is culverts. Does not represent culverts. It captures the road as a continuous land mass, if you will. And we call those things digital dams. Jim and I created that term. That's our claim to fame. So a close look at what are digital dams. What we have here is a linear wetland complex. We have a road bisecting that. And so all of these little arrows, these red arrows that you're seeing, are pointing to field approaches, driveway approaches. They are every bit as much of a digital dam as this great big digital dam that is formed from this road and culvert ditch intersection right there. You know, it makes kind of good sense, or hopefully this slide helps you understand that if we think about the famous aerial lift bridge in Duluth, that in itself is a digital dam. The LiDAR data flew over, LiDAR did its job, it captured that, and we have a digital dam right there in Duluth, even though we all know that that bridge goes up and down. Oh, of course, just had to have that in there. All right. So a close look at that. We're going to zoom in now. So there's the features that I was just identifying earlier. And we're starting to zoom in a little bit more. And now I'm about to turn it. See, so it's turning a little bit. Because I want you to really grasp the understanding of this. Because this exists everywhere, worldwide, where LiDAR data is captured and collected. And so as we turn that, you can see that it's a complete intersection. As I turn it, though, you also should see that the road now just tipped into the landscape. That's because your mind is messing with you. And so I put together a document. We hope to publish it soon. I've been saying that for a while, but these documents have to go through a certification process for accessibility, and that's slowing up a little bit. But I have some pretty extensive documentation out there on digital dams and depressions on the landscape. So now you know a little bit about digital dams, and you know that they exist in the LiDAR data. You've heard me use this phrase, DM hydromodification, a little bit. Essentially, DM hydromodification is removal of the digital dams. And if we look at this illustration here, we see a ditch, and it intersects with a road right there. There's a digital dam. You can look over here, and this is a digital dam that has been removed. So that's really the difference. But the important takeaway is the LiDAR has done its job. I don't want anyone to say that LiDAR is no good. It didn't do what we wanted to do. It did what we expected of it, with the type of collections that we had at that point in time. Almost all LiDAR-derived digital elevation models require some sort of modification, and I like to use the word modification, indicating that you are modifying the source or the raw LiDAR data that we serve. You are changing it, you are modifying it, you are altering those elevation values. And some of you know in this room, there's about a good 12 of you know that I set out at one time to create a standard. And some of you are sitting there thinking, he's still talking about stuff, and the state he hasn't created a standard on for conducting DM hydromodification. And what I learned through that process is that we've had difficulty getting going because everyone has their own business needs and their own amount of time and energy, and funding in particular, to put into the process for conducting DM hydromodification. And that's really hampered our ability to do a statewide standard. Because if we're really going to do a statewide standard, it would be removing all of the digital dams to meet all of the business needs. And so why we have kind of a piecemeal operation going underway right now throughout the state. So, a little bit on Vaughn terminology, because it's important if we think about writing grants, and I want you to realize that we have some documentation out there that identifies that if I say DM higher modification, I'm really encompassing all of these terms. Some people might say conditioning, there's some, we're starting to use enforcing a little bit. Correction, years ago, long before all this, we said correction. We're going to correct the DEM. And the Minnesota GIS folks, as well as the USGS folks, we realize that we can't use the word, we shouldn't be using the word correcting, because it's really bad when you say that in front of a legislative representative, for example, who helped fund this LiDAR collection, and they say, what are you correcting it for? We just spent $12 million. Why are you correcting it? No, we really need to modify the DEM to work for hydrologic applications. So we've created a schema then that identifies these different levels of hydro modification, and really that is getting into, something we don't have the time for today, but it just relates to how much energy, how much time, what is the level of development you're putting into these DEMs to remove those diesel dams. Sometimes people will say, well, that's all good and fine, but DEM hydro modification is not necessary. It might not be necessary, folks, for their business needs, but it might be also necessary for a whole lot of other business needs. And the case in point is this example here. I got this from my colleague Joel Nelson and some of his work with Dave Mullen. This is a very small catchment, a very small watershed on the landscape. We have a ditch right down here. We have a nick point forming right here. We don't need a hydrologically modified DEM to route water off this area until you want to move it right down through here and beyond. So you can model, you can do a train analysis, route the water off there, dump it in the ditch. Folks, I can guarantee you that if you want to actually do true hydrologic modeling and follow that water through the rest of the system, the very first road it encounters, even if it's a small field approach road, the model is going to have to stop. It's going to have to raise the elevation values and spill over that road to carry on. And that's why scope and scale, project scope, and the scale of applicability for any project relates to different business needs in this task we call DEM hydro modification. So again, I have another document that I've written on helping to determine the necessity of DEM hydro modification. Culvert inventories. Culvert inventories, I just want to touch on them a little bit. They relate to a lot of different projects and applications related to clean water. Many of you know I've been a strong advocate for culvert inventories for DEM hydro modification because it helps take some of the guesswork out of where to place a breach line to breach a digital dam. If we look at this example here, this is the top of the road. This is a culvert hidden down in the grass, but this would be where water would route underneath that road. I do want to make a point, though. It is not, you don't have to have a culvert inventory to do DEM hydro modification, to do hydrologic modeling. But you can expedite the process. You can remove some of the uncertainty of where to place these things if you know for a fact where a culvert exists because someone went out and surveyed it. So there's great benefits to having a culvert survey, but not entirely necessary. All right, to help facilitate some of this work, we have a group called the DNR. Well, we were calling ourselves the DNR Water Resources Team, but we've added the word geospatial in there to bring it back to a stronger tie to GIS. This is a group of colleagues. I have Rick Moore up here in the front. He's works for us, and he's on that. We have Steve Clever in the back. I need to know Steve with his work in NWI. And we are on this group here to help facilitate, guide, and steer in a coordinated manner the generation of hydrography, water features in particular, derived from LiDAR. And so these are some of our names right here from a previous presentation that we did at the GIS last year, showcasing some of this work. One of the important things is that we really understand the big picture. We really understand the need to create this data to meet a wide assortment of business needs and put it out there and disseminate it from centralized databases. And that's what we're working towards, kind of a grassroots approach right now. But one of the things we always strive for in the DEM hydro modification work and the creation of these water courses is really having proper hydrologic representation of the landscape and understanding that with that HPI that I've illustrated before. One of the things that I've done lately is using the HPI to do watercourse extraction. It's now successful. It's repeatable. It's something we're exploring for doing, for utilizing anyway. It's just one technique that we presented on in October, where you can work with the HPI and you can essentially pull these signatures right out in a linear product. We would call it a vector data set, if you will. And that's something we're exploring. You can turn it back on top of the DOQ. The bottom line there is, again, we're just striving to create products that have an accurate representation of landscape hydrology. This is a slide of Rick Moore's work. He does a lot of our DM hydromodification work, removing these digital dams from the LiDAR data, as I've just illustrated and showed to you. And this is some of his work here. And this I'm sharing today because it really relates to another slide I have coming up for the One Watershed, One Plan. Thanks. Tyler Kavich in the DNR Remote Sensing Office. He has conducted DM hydromodification in these two major watersheds, the Lake Superior, and we are now exploring putting attributes on line work and getting that into a published format for public consumption. This was funded, I think, primarily through DNR Ecological Water Resources in the Minnesota Coastal Zone Program. And there again, you kind of see the HPI being utilized again for validation of these watercourses up in that area. And this, in the blue line here, this is kind of a classic example of the line work that comes from the DEM in comparison to the existing DNR published watercourse data set, and why people are really interested in creating new hydrography from LiDAR. And so when I talk about validation, really I'm talking about things going to that HPI that I've introduced to you and having these, bringing in these flow paths or these water courses that exist coincidentally or within those water conveyance features. And we can bring in the DOQ as another validation to say, yep, this is complete. If it wasn't complete, we would see the DEM doing odd things and allowing it to fill up. And I apologize for not having time to really capitalize and explain in detail what that means today. But really, in short, if you look at this slide, if we fill the DEM in, we're raising these elevation values. And if I go back and we raise elevation values, then what we have is our water courses coming from the DEM deviate from the water conveyance features on our surface, crossing the road in a different location. And that may work for some business needs, and it doesn't work for some others. I touched a little bit on the One Watershed, One Plan. This is some work that we are conducting. Rick Moore is doing the majority of the DM hydromodification work. But this work was created to utilize LiDAR-derived products, largely to create a hydromodified DEM and also a travel time grid that will then feed into the PTM app tool in the North Fork Crow One Watershed, One Plan watershed. Three primary objectives. Really to establish minimum criteria and requirements for creating these DEMs. Also evaluated an automated approach for hydrologically modifying these DEMs. And then also conducting sensitivity analysis to understand how much is enough for this DM hydromodification and how does it relate to different scales and different watershed sizes and for tool applicability. So a wrap up. Again, I said this earlier, we got to remember that LiDAR did its job. It is riddled. It is absolutely filled with these digital dams. And for us to use these for hydrologic modeling applications, for resource management, and on-the-ground implementation, we have to remove these digital dams, at least some of them, to route that water through there, through that DEM. My next one here really is, I was trying to capitalize on what Bruce was talking about earlier for certainty and uncertainty. One of the things that I'm very certain on, and I'm actually quite passionate about, is if we work with the LiDAR data to derive the most accurate product, I know we can then meet the most business needs with that product. And so we really changed the paradigm on how we think about creating hydrography to fit into tools. And that is, the expense nowadays isn't for someone to map these water features. The expense is now really into hydrologically modifying the DEM. That's where the expense is, because we can extract or create those features from that product. And so that's the end. I hit my time, and That's my friend I met on Saturday night on the beach.